Everything is a negotiation.
Reminding myself, what value am I bringing in this job? What value am I bringing in this negotiation?
Every single meeting, I must mention 3 other names. And the amount of times I've heard that when the pre-salary conversation, I call it pre because I think you should never go in and just have a pay rise conversation on its own.
Hi, I'm Siobhan.
I'm Annabelle.
And I'm Anne.
And we are the Deal Divas, a podcast discussing all things negotiation.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Deal Divas, and we are very blessed to have with us Nadia Edwards-Dashti from the Harrington Starr today. So Nadia, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Well, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me. I absolutely love the concept of this podcast and I'm so excited about our chat today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Maybe you could start off just for the listeners or the watchers to tell them a little bit about your background and what it is that you do, because you do many fantastic things.
Well, thank you. So I have been in the world of recruitment for 20 years now, for my sins. I'm one of the co-founders of the Harrington Starr Group, which is a recruitment agency focused on helping people in technology and sales find jobs in financial services. Financial services meaning your teeny tiny FinTech startups all the way through to your much more traditional financial organizations. And we do that globally, but with hubs in the UK and the US. But, you know, that's sort of like the headline of the story. I think the way that I view recruitment is actually quite unique. And that's how I've built my career. And that uniqueness is around recruitment being a responsibility. And actually that I reject the notion that recruitment is just that transaction of somebody getting a job. It's everything around that, which is actually much more careers focused. It's somebody asking for that pay rise. It's somebody representing themselves in the best possible way they can do day in, day out at work, so that they are recognized fairly and appropriately, that they are put forward, that they are backed in the workplace, that when they make a mistake, that they may be excused and receive fair treatment. These are all the things that I am absolutely obsessed with. And I think that's actually recruitment. And so the ways in which I've turned that from a desire and a sentiment into a reality have been plentiful over the years. So one of the big ones that I must mention is I'm about to hit 500 episodes of my own podcast called FinTech DEI Discussions, something I am so proud of because it actually started as the Women of FinTech series, where I was talking to women or people who identified as women about their careers, their journeys within the industry, and most importantly, the challenges that they were overcoming. And what this has grown into is much more than a gender-focused podcast. This is about inclusion and intersectionality and all the forms that you could ever imagine. And it's not, I haven't grouped it into a box. I've let it flow free, you know, DEI discussions. It's what that means to each individual and their experiences. And this is very much tied into my whole career journey and my path and my mission to reframe what careers should look like within this industry and who can succeed in this industry and who should succeed. I work really hard to make fairness a reality. I could go on for hours on this introduction, but I think that gives you a bit of an idea of what I'm about.
And also your book.
Yes, so thank you. After my first 100 episodes of my podcast, the pandemic hit and I reached out to a number of publishing companies because I said, wow, like what I have on my hands is something so unique. This was, sort of pre-pandemic, before people felt comfortable talking about being excluded in the workplace or felt safe enough to talk about being excluded in the workplace, how to include, how they got over those challenges. It was super, super special that I had this amazing opportunity to talk to 100 amazing women about their experiences and just how they had succeeded in this difficult industry for them. So I went to these publishing companies and I said, I've got to get this down on paper. And really the book ended up being an ode to those first 100 women that joined me on the podcast series. And I called the book FinTech Women Walk the Talk. And Walk the Talk has become a bit of a hashtag of mine because every time I'm with a client or up on stage or moderating a panel, I'm always about how do we turn our sentiment for inclusion and our desire for inclusion, and therefore encouraging people to thrive and setting them up to thrive in the workplace. How do we turn that desire into a reality? So let's walk that talk, and have tangibles around it. And it's something that I'm wholly committed to. And if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, you will see it sort of grows in many different ways. And there's always a new avenue that I'm looking into, or a new voice that I'm celebrating, because that is really my mission, to get people to understand each other better so that we all can grow, progress, and thrive within our workplaces.
That's what I really loved about when we met. It wasn't just talking about the idea or the concept, or, often DEI discussions particularly is so important, and creating that safe space now for people to be able to talk about these things that really, it didn't feel that safe to do so years ago, because you wonder what might the repercussions be if you raise issues, etc. But what I love is you turn it into tangible action and tangible takeaways, and things that really make a difference. And you just shared before we started recording something you do in meetings, and I'd love for you to mention that, and then I want to ask you some questions about it. So what's something that you try to do?
So I think the reason why like the tangible bit is so important for me is because I actually look at this from like a recruitment hat on and a talent hat on, right? And what is the best way that I can affect this industry? By helping the people that we know find jobs and then get promoted in those jobs and get pay rised in those jobs. And I have this amazing visibility of so many different companies in the industry. I get to sit with their senior leaders and ask, what's your gender pay gap? What's your paternity leave? What are you doing around your ERG group? So I have these amazing conversations, not just around who do you need to hire next, but what does the next year look like? And one of my rules to myself is always, when I'm in a meeting room, I've got to make sure I mention 3 other people's names, because I'm all about this sort of representation, awareness, and debunking these myths that certain demographics don't exist within our industry. So one of the biggest ones. So let's take our software engineering and development sector for recruitment. If I could tell you the amount of times hiring managers have said to me, oh, Nadia, we'd have loved to have hired a female developer, but they just don't exist, do they? The amount of times I've heard that when we have got such amazing female developers in this country, in the US, that by the way, would love a new job, right? But the system isn't set up for them. I'm trying to challenge that system. So my rule is very much around debunking that. And I say to myself, in every single meeting, I must mention 3 other names. And one of them will always be someone I've interviewed on the podcast. So, for example, if we're talking about the importance of fair promotion, I will say, well, I think you need to listen to Corinne Martinez from Edenred. I did a podcast with her recently, and she spoke about being recognised fairly when she returned to work after a career break. And listening to her is super important, because my message will land by another person talking about it. But also it then reinstills my point around awareness, representation. She is Corinne, who I've just mentioned. She's head of sales at an amazing financial services organization, and she had an extended career break. How many hiring people out there would think, oh, well, we can't bring in someone as head of sales after an 8-year career break? Well, yes, you can. Look at her. There we go. Debunk that myth. I think that's super powerful.
Yes. Oh, amazing. Fantastic. So we actually met, didn't we, at the We Are Tech Festival, when we were both on the negotiation panel. And I heard that passion when we were both on stage and you were talking. And that's where I was like, we have to get you on the Deal Divas. Because as much as this podcast is about negotiation, it's also about people's journeys and the challenges they face and how they navigate that. And I think all the work that you're doing are so many mini and macro negotiations all the time. So there's so many ways we can take this conversation. And I think that's the thing. Often people don't realize when they're in a negotiation and how, even in a conversation, by shifting someone's perspective, by making them look at things differently, by helping them to see there's another way they can go about this. These are all different negotiation techniques, as well as, just conversations that you can have. So negotiation is so much more than just, here's a contract, what's the price? It covers so
Totally
much.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And it took me a while to understand that, like as I said at the start, I've been in recruitment for 20 years, and I think it was really easy for me at the start to think, oh, negotiation is just when I'm talking to a new client and we're deciding what our terms and conditions will be.
Yeah.
Put negotiation in that box. But actually, everything is a negotiation.
Yeah.
And, one thing that I learned very quickly and very early on in recruitment was that advocacy is a form of negotiation, because you are persuading someone to look at something in a totally different way. And actually a huge proportion of recruitment is seeing how quickly certain people are discounted from interview processes for crazy reasons. Probably a better way of saying that, for reasons that you would never have expected, for the tiniest of reasons, for assumptive reasons. Oh well, she moved on from that company quickly. That is such a common one. She moved on from that company quickly. She couldn't have been successful. Rather than, I know the truth, and that company didn't stick to the EVP that the employee value proposition that they had subscribed to from day one. And I think it's really interesting that once you get your head around, well, actually, that is a form of negotiation. Asking questions: why did you make that assumption? Why did you decide not to put that person forward? What made you think that that was the most important thing that we should be looking at? Tell me more about that. And I think one of my biggest lessons over the years is that, the 80-20 rule of 80% of your time ask questions and then start talking. And again, that took me a while to get my head around, but it's something that stayed with me, and something that I say a lot now in the office. Like, we've got to be asking more questions. And actually, I think negotiation is all about what you just said there: perspectives and questions, and why someone has said the statement that they've said. What does that actually mean, and where does it come from?
Yeah, I totally agree. And whether people are going in and they're, renegotiating their salary, or they're wanting to, progress their careers, or whether they're actually just they're working in a role of sales or procurement and they're negotiating, I think that ability to develop a greater curiosity around questions is amazing. It equips you so brilliantly. And too often people are thinking from, okay, this is what I need to mention, and this is what I need to achieve, and oh gosh, I'm feeling nervous, and I wonder what the other person is thinking of me, and did they agree with me, and what did their body language do? And we get all in our heads about stuff, and actually we just need to get more curious and ask questions and understand what matters to the other party. So often when I'm talking to people about their kind of career progression and negotiating those sorts of things, and conversations we had at the Artec Festival, it was like, okay, what does the company value? What value do you bring to the table that they may not have realized ticks those boxes that they need to be reminded of? What things have you achieved that you're presuming they're going to remember, but they probably aren't? So you need to remind them of these things. And
I think that's super key, like presuming what somebody's going to remember. So in my career, I've spent a lot of time training recruiters to ask questions, right? And early on, I'd get so frustrated because I'd be like, I've already told them this, and like of course that just sounds so naive of me now. Like, whenever did you tell somebody something once and they just got it? Of course not, right? But there was a moment where I was, doing some research about just messages landing and listening, and the stat is people can only take in 25% of what you say at one point. And look, I don't know whether that's up to date now, but it's something that really, really, stood with me over time. And what that's done for me in how we train, but also how I'm communicating with people, is if they're only going to pick up 25%, I need to make sure it's the 25% that they care about and that I care about. It's the valuable 25%, not something that I said by accident that I didn't mean. And how do we ensure that that if we say to ourselves, actually, everything is a type of negotiation, and I
Yeah.
want to make sure that the pertinent points will be remembered. Well, what are the pertinent points to me? What are the pertinent points to them? And for me to know that, I need to ask questions. And then I need to make sure that I really am underscoring my responses to the most important things to that person.
Yeah.
And that may be repetition, saying things in a couple of different ways.
Yeah.
But all of this, I think it does hinge on what you mentioned, that we can get into our own heads when we say the word negotiation. Oh, gosh, I'm about to go into negotiation. Oh, what are they going to think? And actually, if we can say, well, everything is.
Yeah.
Everything is an opportunity for me to represent myself really well, to be able to move myself forward, get something that I want for my own sanity or progress or whatever it may be, and actually get into the habit of debate. And, I may not know what you're thinking, but I'm going to get closer to it. By asking a few questions. I'm going to get to know you as an individual. I'm going to make sure you know me, and you know the bits of me and what I do in this workplace and how I represent myself and what I contribute. Those are the bits I want you to know. And that has taken me personally a very long time, because I've seen that sort of, I think it's the best way of describing it is self-promotion. I've seen that historically come from one personality type who's almost abused it. And everyone will recognize what I mean. The person who knocks on the boss's door, head in, I've done this today, I've done that today, I've done this today, I've done that today. And I'm sorry, that's never going to be my personality, but I don't need to do it that way.
No.
I need to make sure that I am in the appropriate times and spaces, whether it is the pre salary conversation. I call it pre, because I think you should never go in and just have a pay rise conversation on its own. It needs probably 2 conversations previous. It needs to be in post promotion conversations. It needs to be in monthly reviews. But we need to be very thoughtful around all of this.
Yeah, definitely. And a real shift for me was when I started to think about things in terms of value. And I really started to think, rather than this is a selling and a buying, or this is a salary and this is a job role. It's like actually reminding myself, what value am I bringing in this job? What value am I bringing in this negotiation? And what value does the other party want or need? And it's a value exchange. And when you think of it that way, it's then I found it easier to start to identify the things that I bring to the table, the ways that I can offer value. And it was maybe it's something to do with me, but I found it easier to give myself credit for things when I thought of it in terms of, how can I add more value? Oh, I actually add value this way. I add value this way. Oh, wait a minute. I also add value for this, this, and this. And I think that word just really helped me maybe get more comfortable with coming to the table and talking about the value I create, the talent I have, and not feel like I'm showing off.
Yes.
Because it was then kind of pinpointing the things that mattered to that company, or the things that mattered in that contract or that conversation. And it didn't feel like, oh, actually, I'm just tooting my horn. No, I'm hearing you, and I'm presenting value that clearly resonates with the things you've mentioned.
I totally agree. And I think that value piece is, I describe it as giving yourself the gift of confidence. So I always describe confidence as a gift, because, when people say, oh, back yourself more, be more confident. Oh, okay, cheers.
How?
Yeah, all right, I'll get a personality transplant. Yeah. But how, and actually I believe that really all of us have the responsibility to gift confidence to another person, but how do you gift it to yourself? Right? Yeah. And how do you gift it to others? Well, to others, I think it's really easy. Recognize what they're doing. Wow, you did absolutely amazing in that meeting. I loved how you stood up on that point and then repeated it and Wow, that is so important for people. How do you do it for yourself? We mentioned it at Vanessa Vallerly's event. The folder in your inbox where you email yourself with every amazing thing that you've done, and it could be teeny tiny, like, oh God, I just made it through this, or I did that, or it could be I've just won this award, and really it's the teeny tiny all the way up to the big things that everyone will notice. And I believe it's those smaller moments that really build a person's confidence for you on those down days, to look back and go, wow,
Yeah.
I did run that meeting. Oh, wow, I didn't realize that was my idea for that project. And that was the date that I came up with it, you know?
Yeah.
And especially before going into these meetings where you've got to represent yourself and say, I would like to, be promoted, or I think I'm due for a pay rise. Those conversations that can be very anxiety inducing for people. Let's set ourselves up for the best success and remind ourselves of our value. What we can do that other people can't, that is something that I have really held on to the whole of my career. And one thing I didn't realize, I think it actually began from quite a lonely place, and it's quite sad to say. I used to say to myself, be indispensable, and that comes from a place of fear, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That I've always been thinking, gosh, am I going to be let go? What do I need to do? And that's kept me running. A lot of people will run towards a goal, whereas it's quite sad to say, I most of my career it's probably
Running
my
away.
personality. And really, I look back to, younger me, and I think, you poor thing, like cut yourself a break. But actually, what it has done for me is, and I never would have thought that I was an innovative person with new ideas, but I look back at what I've done, and I look forward to what I'm doing now. And actually, I have really fallen in love with doing things differently and innovation. And if that's where it came from, that fear, well, then I thank that fear, because it's given me loads of evidence to myself to make myself more confident, which then allows me to pitch these new ideas in different form of negotiation. This is why I think I should be given the time and space to do this. This is why I think you should be joining me on stage to talk about this quite scary topic. This is why I think we should be doing that. It's all different forms of persuasion, influence, moving yourself forward, but I think also others as well.
And having, like, for example, you mentioned about that email folder, it's just a place you can go to and kind of recharge your confidence and boost yourself up. But just in those moments when you're going into that difficult meeting, or you're capable of the conversation you're about to go into, but you're just nervous about the individual or the person you're doing it with. Maybe their character's very different, their communication style is very different. So boosting your confidence and reminding yourself how capable you are and what you've achieved before going into that conversation really helps, because sometimes it's not the situation that's the issue. It's that we might be talking with somebody that we find it difficult to speak with, or they remind us of somebody that we've had challenging relationships with. It's not even them, it's just their behavior, right? I don't know if you've had that, but I've had some meetings with people where, particularly earlier on in my career, I was working in some industries where I was surrounded by people that were more in their kind of mid to late 40s, early 50s, late 50s, male, and I was in my early 20s. So I was just, they didn't realize it, but there was just a certain tone in the way they talked to me. And I just felt like there were many times that I was managing projects and I would still be kind of talked down to because
Would
I was
undermine you. Yeah, I totally recognize that.
Yeah. So I would remind myself of the things that I've achieved and how capable I was, just to help me have more strength in my voice, because I noticed sometimes I would shrink in those situations, even going in before anything's happened.
Totally. And it's really fascinating, because one thing that I am learning, I'm going to be 42 this month, right? And it's taken me this long, and I wish I could go back to me in my early 20s and just, really like just know this, like in the Matrix when they're sort of just like injected with kung fu. Like I wish I could just be injected with this knowledge, and I totally believe it. But we are surrounded by different personality types, and that's okay. And some of those men that you described, they could have been asking you a question, and me, just the same as you at that time, I would have sat there and gone, that means he thinks that I can't do it, or I haven't done it, or I've been undermined. And you know what? There probably would have been many of them that were undermining you. But one thing I've learned is that when I push back at certain personality types, and it's almost like I've created a boundary. Don't talk to me like that. I know, and it may not be that I've said don't talk to me like that. It may be
You've reasserted your authority or your position or your knowledge and that thing, and the dynamic just shifts. It's almost like you
they take a step
reinforce
back.
again that you've got this, or that you're capable of this, or They don't need to go
But
that way. And
yes, I have considered that. I've considered that, and I've checked it, and I back-checked it as well. And I also got our colleague to have a look at that. But thank you for putting your hand up and questioning that. Please let me know if you have any other questions, and I bet you they won't. Because actually, everyone's different personality types. Sometimes, there'll be a leader in the room, and there's other leaders who aren't the actual leaders, and they feel the need to interject.
Yeah.
I've also learned over the years that that's okay too. So
Yeah.
I was in
maybe sometimes they have like concerns of theirs. Maybe I've had it before where there are some people that have had senior positions and they're just so detail orientated, and they've had certain things happen in projects previously. So they ask about that, and it seems like they're undermining the individual, but they just have this nervousness or this fear or this concern around certain things. And once you make it clear that you've got it, or all of that's addressed, they ease up. So it's something to do with their insecurities as well, not just that they're kind of being derogatory or looking down at you, but it just depends. It can be misinterpreted, can't it?
Yeah, totally. And I think that when we look at negotiation and being able to, so negotiate a difficult situation, it may be a response like we just said, or it may be, tell me more about why you're concerned about that. Like, if only I'd known to say that phrase 20 years ago, tell me your concerns about that. Let me understand, without me taking it personally.
Yeah.
And me sort of, one thing I've really learned is making notes as people are talking. It's brilliant for me. It really helps me remain calm. It reminds me this isn't a personal affront. This is just somebody needing to get their opinion out. Okay, I write that opinion down, and then I'm like, okay, so first point, and I'll tackle it point by point. So much easier. I'm so much more in control. It's a great negotiation technique to summarize. So you're telling me that these are the three things. Why is that one so important to you? Why are you so concerned about that piece? Has something happened in the past? Digging into questions around
exploring their concerns and any constraints or
what
any
is
other
stopping you
information
from
you don't
backing
know.
me on this? Yes, exactly. And I think, if only I'd known that before, I would have been able to. So, of course, there are still people out there that misbehave 100%, that abuse their position of power 100%. But I think even with that, if you're given these sort of tools and techniques, you can handle it really well.
Yeah. I think when I was early in my career, I had heard of asking some of these sorts of questions when I'm in meetings or when I'm negotiating, but I was nervous to do it. And I think part of the reason was because I didn't really understand how valuable it was to understand the needs, the priorities, the concerns, the constraints. I understood it's important to ask about the needs, but the constraints, the concerns, all that sort of stuff, I thought I should keep away from, and that would be prying. But actually, it shows that I'm looking at the full picture. Writing down those objections, asking, is there anything else? What else might be a concern? Is there anything else affecting your decision? Just getting it all out on the table means that we can really be on the same page, and they will see how capable I am of identifying those issues and handling those issues or addressing them. So, yeah, I think that kind of awareness and then some really powerful skills and questions.
I think the key words there are handling the issues and addressing them. And what
Yes.
always used to stress me out was, okay, I'm listening to the answer. So it's almost like stages, right? So your first stage is, okay, I get it. I need to ask questions about this. You ask questions. Now what you do about it? Because you have to handle it and then address it, right? But if you're listening to the answers and you're stressing out about how you're going to handle this, and you're in a room and it's you and there's loads of other people who probably disagreeing with you, that's a lot of pressure. And look, this is my personality type, but I'm all about preempt, and prepare. So like, even with my questions, I'd say things like, can you tell me more about that? Because hopefully I'll get to hear exactly where you're coming from, and I'll be able to address that concern, and I'll be able to convince you on why I've got this covered and we've moved forward. So tell me, where does this real concern come from? I used to, and I still find that as a really nice way of just sort of paving my way into what we're going to do without, and look, it is my personality. Some other people are super, super happy to be quite confrontational with their negotiation. It's just not my style, because I used to find it so stressful. I'm all about getting the stress out of it for everybody. And actually, if we disagree at the end of it, that's okay. because it is okay. We may disagree today, and then tomorrow we go again. And that's the journey that I've personally been on. But I do think that's quite helpful if there are people listening who are thinking, oh, how do I then move it on? It's a step by step by steps.
Definitely. And I used to sometimes fear asking those difficult questions because I thought, what if they ask me something or present a problem and I don't know how to fix it? So sometimes it's like avoiding those and trying to just get things to move forwards. Let's sign the contract, let's get things going, and then figure out some other issues if they come up later. But actually having that shift of realizing, let's get everything on the table, and understanding the value it brings when you say, actually, I don't know about, section 5, how we can deal with that. But what I can do is take it to my team internally. We'll have a look at it and we'll come back to you. And that reinstates a lot of trust, doesn't it?
Yeah, and confidence. Like it's great to be able to do that. And there's nothing wrong with not knowing something, but I think it took me years to be able to say that and truly believe it. And now and now I'm so cool with not knowing. So I'm to the point where I say, I'm so sorry if I'm supposed to know that. I don't. Could you explain that to me? And I think there's a power in that. And we can all learn from it. But I do think just taking things slow, not getting into your head, being able to say to people, tell me more about that. What can we work out as a next step? What could be a compromise here? Like, almost like talking out loud to move things. It's a pathway. And that realization that the problem is what we need to be talking about, not skirting around. And that again took me a while to really feel comfortable with. And I say to our recruiters all the time, if there weren't problems, then we wouldn't have a job. Right? Like and I think that is true for many people's professions. If it was easy, would you be sitting here? Would you be needed? No, that's the reason why we're here. So actually, we need to find those problems. We need to predict where those problems may come up and get comfortable with that. That's great when you're thinking about negotiation. Like, it's not supposed to be easy, because if it was easy, then everyone would be getting the same promotion, which means none of us are. Then everyone would be getting the pay rise, which isn't going to happen. So it's sort of reframing it like that, and just getting used to representing yourself.
Yeah. And I feel like every product, every business, every service, every person as an employee, we're all solving problems. There's a problem and we're solving it. And I think that's the wonderful thing. There's the space for a range of companies or a range of people, because they will solve that issue in a slightly different way, with slightly different value points or qualities that they bring to the table. And I think when we have that shift, people then realize it's not about me against you. It's actually just what's the right fit.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that, I think that's also something that comes up a lot in negotiation, isn't it? Like, who's going to win? And, it's about actually us all feeling a little bit of a win here, because, there's been a number of negotiations, and I'll use sort of black and white negotiations, like terms negotiations with clients, where I've negotiated a really fantastic agreement for Harrington Starr, for us. But then we haven't received many vacancies to work with that company because they deem us slightly too expensive. It wasn't a win-win. And actually, if it's not something where both people feel comfortable, it's a loss. So it's really, it's really, really interesting that, you may walk out and go, great, I've got this. Have you? Does that mean that you've just pushed so hard that you've got today's pay rise, but you've lost out on tomorrow's promotion? And I think that's really about empathy, understanding, and it's not about a battle or a war. And I know a lot of people will be thinking, well, that is negotiation, I've got to win, but win at what cost? And I'm a big believer in long-term relationships. And so actually, I think that's the win, when you're both winning 5, 6, 7 years later, rather than just for today.
Yeah, I think that's the most lucrative negotiations, is when it's a collaboration, because there's greater trust, there's better communication generally, and looking at that longer term relationship, it's a lot more value comes to play, and looking at the big picture. Like, I don't, like you said, I don't want to just win today, because what's going to happen tomorrow or next month, or when your contract gets renewed, or when the promotion is being discussed, so it's something to be mindful of. I think there's that perception shift around the word negotiation, because people often think it's aggressive. I have to win, you have to lose. The less you get of what you want, the better I've done. And really, the most skilled negotiators I know don't approach it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think it's a bit of like, the culture, like sort of like the 80s, 90s, maybe like film culture around negotiation, like even like Wolf of Wall Street, everyone's sort of hanging on while he's, doing this big close. And I think that's been really glorified over the years. And actually, I think what that's done is it's sort of glorified it for a certain personality type that thinks that's the way forward. And then it's actually excluded other personality types who just look at that and think, oh, that's vile. And it's done nothing for all of us, and actually being able to negotiate and do well for one another, So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, I definitely find that. So in my role with Scott Work, obviously I'm helping train people, but I'm also having conversations with clients about training their teams and what their needs are within teams. And it's interesting, the discussions around that kind of perception shift. And so many times clients are like, we actually really need this training, but previously we haven't been aware that negotiation was the thing that we needed. We thought it was more sales, it was more persuasion, but we've realized actually just trying to convince the other side and force them to agree to you isn't going to get that long-term benefit that you want, and the amount of value that it can bring from really skilled kind of negotiation processes. Which kind of brings me on to one of the questions I had, which was when it comes to your worst negotiation that you've had in your career, tell us a bit about that. Sometimes it's fun to hear.
Yeah. So this one, oh my goodness! Like my hands, my palms only get sweaty like when I fly on a plane. But just thinking about this, I'm going already.
Yeah, I can see it's like already having an effect.
So it was sort of like my first, second year in recruitment, and my boss at the time had said, right, everyone, by the end of today, you have to have booked a meeting with a new client, right? And this is sort of 2005, 2006. Like everything was super aggressive in recruitment. Like it was the sort of things that happened in offices just absolutely wouldn't be allowed now. Yeah. Like taking your chairs away, cutting off people's ties, swearing. Like it was just. Yeah. It was just vile. So there was a real fear factor around, oh my goodness, I need to find this meeting. Anyway, I called, found this company. They were hiring, amazing. So I pitched to have a meeting with them. I was not pitching the decision maker. I was pitching his EA, who sat in a room outside of his. So she would put the phone to one side, and you could hear her walking into another room saying, oh, they're saying they could come in tomorrow. And then she'd come back. So it was basically like that, right? So first rule of negotiation, talk to the right person. This is just so wrong, all of this, right? So that's sort of point one. Anyway, she comes back to the phone and said, yes, he can meet with you tomorrow. It was a company near Chancery Lane, which is relevant, I'll tell you. He can meet tomorrow, but we will only ever pay our recruitment agencies a fee of 18% of the salary that the person ends up getting. We're not going to pay any more. Now, our standard fees were something like 27.5% or something like that. So, you'd want to have a negotiation around this. I then turned to my scary boss and go, oh, I've got a meeting, but they want me to say 18%. And he's like, well, just say whatever you need to say to get the meeting. So I straight away, no questions, no anything. Like it didn't even occur to me to say, have you ever agreed anything outside of 18%? I mean, that would have been a nice question to ask. No, I was just sheer panic. So I say, yes, 18% fine. See you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Right? Now, my boss wants to come on this meeting with me, and this is why Chancery Lane is relevant. So I ended up buying a flat years later, very close to Chancery Lane, and every time I walked past this business's front door, I would nearly vomit. Like this is how it made me feel. Anyway, so my boss comes to me to this meeting, and the whole way there, he's saying, So we're not doing 18%. The best that you're gonna agree to in this meeting is our standard, 27 or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
So I'm panicking, thinking, oh my gosh. We go into this office, up some stairs. It's a huge, long office. There's about 150 people sitting on tables, and the guy that we're meeting is right at the end in a glass room. We sit down. I barely say hello. I barely say anything around anything, like how are you, any small talk. Thank you so much for inviting us to your offices. I'm so excited to learn about your business. I'd love this to be a long-term partnership. Nah, none of that. I just say, I shouldn't have agreed 18%. We need to agree 27, maybe 26. And I'll tell you why, because, and I go into this sort of like absolute just
sales pitch,
verbal diarrhea of a sales pitch of why I'm a recruiter and how I can help. And he is just sort of like mouth open looking at me. Even my boss is like, who by the way, doesn't say a word, right?
Doesn't save you or step in at any point.
Nothing. And then he slowly, he sort of sits there and he slowly says, so you're telling me that you're not going to do the 18% you said you would do yesterday to come in and meet with me? And I just like, absolute sheer panic. Look at my boss, look back. I go, no, we can't do that. He goes, get out. So we stand up, we have to walk past 100 and like I'm there head down, and at the time I'm like 21, 22 and that was it. The minute that we left, I just burst into tears.
Yeah.
Right? And like my boss at the time was like, put us up together, like no emotion at all. But I look back at that and I think, do you know what, that was such it was the right word, formative experience of
Traumatizing.
Traumatizing experience of my life. But it also taught me so much. Like, I couldn't tell you the name of the company, but I know the door that I walked in. I couldn't tell you the name of the CEO, but I remember everything that I felt about it, and it really has like it's a very important experience, because when I think of how to do it right, I remember, like, if you're not trained correctly in this, like, I was never a bad person. I wasn't trying to mess things up on purpose. Fairness and honesty and transparency is something that's always been important to me, even as a child. Saying to someone I will do something and then reneging on that, I was forced into that situation. And I didn't have the skills to say no. I'm not going to get a meeting by essentially lying and saying I can do 18, and then later my boss telling me you can't. That taught me so much, that I have values, but also I could have handled it so much better. And if you think, like, in your lifetime, could you rewind to a situation and a time and just handle it like I would now, and actually have a conversation, like, what is this vacancy, what can we do, how can we meet somewhere in the middle, all of that sort of stuff. Like, let me understand what your problem is, so I can see whether I can solve it and how well I can solve it, and ask questions around, how much value is it to do this quickly, like, how much value would that be to you, how much money do you think you spend on hiring the wrong staff, or how much money do you think you lose when people leave quickly, and questions like this. But I didn't have the tools to do that. So yes, that is my worst story.
If you haven't had the training, then people typically end up kind of repeating what their bosses are demonstrating or telling them to do. So that's what you did. You were like, oh God, you pressured into having to have a meeting, otherwise what might happen? And then, going in and feeling like you have no choice but to say a certain thing you've been told. And you really need that training, that support, and the skills to approach, even if you needed to get the number down, up quite significantly. Like, how are you going to go about doing that?
But also going into there with the right mindset. I was going in there like shaking, and so one thing that is really important to me, and I talk about this a lot in my career, is happiness at work. And I think that so there's lots of negotiation that happens in recruitment where candidates will change their mind on going to a final interview because they stress themselves out. They're like, oh, well, I don't think they're going to do this for me, so I'm not going to go. And, a recruiter has to do a lot to say, well, hold on a minute, like, let's reduce that stress. What's actually going on in your mind? Of course, I can cancel that final interview, but, let's give you the option, let's give you a chance here, like what's going on in your mind, and talking. And that situation I just told you about, it's really like helped me understand, if I'm feeling good and happy, I am in the best position to be able to say to someone, hold on a minute, I can hear that you're feeling stressed. Talk me through your decision making on this. Of course I will cancel it for you, but just let me understand what's going on. Versus, okay, I'll go and cancel it. All right, I'll let you know if I've got something else. That's terrible recruitment, and terrible negotiation, right? Because you're ultimately negotiating for the best for somebody when they could be not doing the best for themselves. It's really tricky in recruitment. But if you're feeling unsafe, if you're feeling nervous, if you're feeling anxious, you can't do your best to advocate for somebody else. And that's a whole different world. And that's what I believe recruitment is. You've got to be performing at your absolute best to advocate and negotiate for somebody else. You can't let them down. And so that experience of a terrible negotiation, I think, is really powerful for me, because it's really been able to make me feel very confident and passionate about how to do things right.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your journey of how you went from there to where you are now, and obviously the Harrington Starr.
Yeah. So, look, that situation was a real like turning point. Like I found my first couple of years in recruitment incredibly stressful. There was a lot of tears in bathrooms at lunchtimes. It was definitely not an environment where I could, crying on the desk didn't happen. I hid it all really well. But I found the whole thing so stressful. But I didn't want it to have the better of me. And there was someone close to me in my life who didn't think that I would make it. And so the stubbornness in me was that I had to, and so I put my head down, and despite all the problems and the things that were absolutely not right at the time, I put my head down and I learned recruitment. And you know what? I learned how to do it by listening. I listened to the questions other people asked and I wrote them down. I had a notepad with me, and when you watch somebody else representing themselves really well in a meeting, I'd write that down. And literally I had scripts everywhere, like stuck around my desk. Like I sat next to a window. I had scripts everywhere. If someone says this, these are the 5 questions you could ask. And actually that forms some of the basis of the Harrington Starr training manual, where we have an 100-page document of 20 questions after any objection somebody could give you, like all the different things to gather. And when I'm talking to people now, I always say, train your brain to ask 7 questions to an objection. Like, don't even think about what, like changing their mind. Don't even think about that. Ask 7 questions,
I remember in a previous role I did, we used to say that objection is actually just a request for more information.
Yeah, exactly. Reframe it. Like, don't be afraid of it. And it was all really to sort of help like now we talk about mental health, but like back then it was really it was all great sales techniques. It was great career techniques for improvement, but actually it's great mental health techniques for like keeping me safe. Like, there's much safety around somebody who wasn't mentally tough, who didn't necessarily have the support. And I took everything to heart, as I still do. So it was, but it's become a great training ground for the right way to do this job, I believe, But I think I was just a very different personality type to ever make it in recruitment, especially from back then. It was personality types who were extroverts, who were direct, who were your typical salespeople, not embarrassed to self-promote. It's a wonder I even got hired, but then, I'm still here, successful 20 years later. And it's because I actually did it differently. And I built a way that worked for me, which was this sort of procedural way of making sure I was truly advocating for people. And I learned this system that if I didn't want to be stressed, then actually I just need to give people options. And that's great for them. Make sure every single one of my candidates have more than one option with me. Then it doesn't matter which one is the best for them. because
Yeah.
actually it's really easy to support them. And then vice versa on the client side, make sure they've got options.
Yeah.
And that really de-stressed things for me, which allowed me to get more and more evidence examples and case studies, which I spoke about at Vanessa Vallely's event. Evidence examples and case studies for myself, but also for my clients and candidates of where I had been successful. And over the years, that's really been a mantra of mine. So, once I really sort of understood the system of recruitment, I then became confident in questioning it.
Yeah.
And questioning, why is it that we charge the way we do? Why is it that people interview the way they do? And the interview process was something that I've really spent a long time, and I think made some pretty good steps forward in really helping clients understand that it shouldn't be a one-way street interviewing. It's about a partnership.
100%.
And those days of panel interviews and are you good enough for us? That's taken me years of talking to clients. And I think also, circumstance and society has dictated this as well. But that was something that I battled against, in sort of 2007, 2008, early days. And I think, all of my career, it has stemmed from actually something that's quite natural to me, and that's advocacy. I'm much better at advocating for other people than I am myself. And that's why I think actually recruitment is a great job for me, because I look at things that I see are unfair and I try and make them fair. Imagine if we can do that as the system. That really is where things get exciting. And I think negotiation comes into so many layers of that, from, why are you interviewing the way you're interviewing? Why did you say no to that person? Like, and don't just tell me it's because they weren't the right cultural fit. Like, let's talk for real, like what really happened. But, I think me getting told the reality of situations is also a really good negotiation tip. Me being able to build relationships with people so they can tell me the truth. Because how can you negotiate with anybody when they're giving you peripheral answers? So all of these things I've really, worked on and built over the years. And I haven't got it 100% right. But one thing I am committed to is learning every day.
Yeah, and your investment in those relationships helps you kind of see behind the curtains of what's really going on, and that trust that you're building in really the value and the kind of, I think I'd say morals, but the kind of the values and the principles with which you're approaching this, I think is something that really resonated with me when I was hearing about the work that you do. It's totally different quality, and I think people identify that as soon as you speak, it's evident. So that trust is there, that you aren't just about a transactional recruitment process, that you really care, that you're interested, and you will actually find them fit. It's not just about one and done, let's go. Which is something I really appreciated, and I was like, I've got to get you on to interview you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That's been so insightful to understand more about your industry and your role and the difference you're making in your approach, and also to help with diversity, equity and inclusion, and also just to hear about your suggestions and tools and techniques when it comes to negotiating. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You too. Thank you. And anyone who's got any questions for Nadia, or if they want to get in touch, feel free to reach out to us. And Nadia, you'll find you're easy to find on various platforms, aren't you?
LinkedIn is the best way, and I have my number on there as well. I'm really easy to get hold of.
Yeah, Nadia's fab. So I recommend if you're in need of her services, definitely reach out. And of course, they can check out your podcast as well. And yeah, if any has any questions or anything else you'd like us to focus on for future episodes, please do email deal.divas@scottwork.com. Thank you very much.